As we know, Joseph, when he was 17, was taken by his brothers in an attempted murder plot where they ultimately, through Judah and Reuben, decided not to murder him, but they were going to sell him off to the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites were trading spices and other things that the Egyptians couldn't get. Were on the way to Egypt, so they took him and sold him to Potiphar, the chief executioner of Pharaoh in Pharaoh's court, as a slave. Joseph rises up and becomes the chief head person in Potiphar's household. He then has Potiphar's wife coming on to him because Joseph is very attractive. And he pushes her away until she won't have it anymore. And she comes on him really, really hard and tries to have sexual relations with him, and he runs out of the house. So now she's really embarrassed and says, I got to cover my behind here. So what I'm going to do is lie about this and say that he tried to rape me. So a woman scorned in this situation is going to be very, very angry and very, very vengeful. And Potiphar then, remember now, he's a chief executioner. He puts Joseph in prison, but he doesn't kill him. Potiphar was a eunuch, and Potiphar probably knew what his wife was like. He also knew what Joseph was like because he hired him, or actually he bought him as a slave, but he put him into the position of head of his household. So he knew that Joseph was trustworthy. He could have killed Joseph, and that was a capital crime, doing something like that. So the fact that he lived and he went to prison means that Potiphar knew what his wife was like, but he had to do something. He had to do something. He was pushed into this political scenario here. So Joseph's in prison. Joseph interprets dreams to the chief cupbearer, which is the butler, and the chief baker. And he says to the cupbearer, hey, Pharaoh's going to restore you in 3 days when Pharaoh has his birthday party. And he says to the baker, he says, Pharaoh's going to take your head off in 3 days and you will not be restored. Dreams come true. And these dreams that he is able to discern are very similar to the ones he had when he went to meet his brothers when they were trimming sheep shearing. And they hated him for it. The dreams that he had back then, they were interpreting, not Joseph. Joseph just said, hey, I got this dream. He's this innocent 17-year-old kid. I got this dream that says, I'm standing in the middle of these sheaves and all of these 12 bow down to me, and then the sun and the moon and the stars, they bow down to me, and his brothers and his dad both interpret this as, so what, we're going to serve you? Joseph never said that. He's just telling them what the dreams are. He's an innocent kid. So he's in prison. He's in prison, and he says to the cupbearer, he says, look, when you get restored, you tell Pharaoh that I'm here, and I'm not a career slave. I mean, my dad wasn't a slave. My families weren't slaves. I got pushed into this. It was inappropriate that this happened to me. Yeah, right, I'll do that for you. Of course, he gets back into court, and he's a direct report to Pharaoh too, as is Potiphar. So you can just see the political intrigue there where the cupbearer is not really willing to go against Potiphar. I mean, he just got out of prison after all. He doesn't want to go back, so he's not going to say anything that's going to be inflammatory. So he never says anything about Joseph, and Joseph languishes in prison. Finally, Pharaoh has dreams. And these dreams are really strange. They're dreams of basically, once the interpretation is done, 7 years of famine and preceded by 7 years of plenty. And he asks his magicians, he says, can you guys tell me what these are? They can't. But the cupbearer sees an opportunity maybe to push himself into a higher political position. And he says, there was a guy in prison when I was there that was pretty good with dreams. Hey, you may want to consult him. He doesn't say how accurate Joseph was. He doesn't promote Joseph. He just says, you may want to take a look at this kid, So he's 29 by then. So they bring him out of prison. They clean him up. Potiphar evidently was the one that did this because he was in charge of the prison. They clean him up, they make him look presentable, they make sure he's shaved so he looks like the Egyptians, even though Pharaoh is a Hyksos, a Semite, who had taken over Egypt at that time. And Pharaoh retells his dreams. And you remember the dreams. The first one was these 7 fat cows come out of the Nile, followed by 7 very lean cows. The 7 lean cows eat the fat cows. But the lean cows never get bigger. And then there's a similar one where there were 7 pieces of grain on a stalk, and that one talks about withering taking place. And he said, I don't understand these. And Joseph, standing in front of Pharaoh, says there's going to be, he describes it in detail, but in essence, there's going to be 7 years of enormous plenty, bountiful crops here, followed by 7 years of famine. And the famine is going to be like you've never seen before. And he says, what you ought to do, he says, you ought to hire somebody to store up as much as you can for the first 7 years. So he does that, and he hires Joseph. He said, well, you're the guy, you can do this. So here's Joseph getting elevated again. This time he's made prime minister. He is the second in command of the greatest and most powerful nation on the earth at that time. And simply because he's able to do what Pharaoh needs, and you can just see God leading him along all the way in this. Joseph trusted God, he loved God, he continually referred to God, and the text never says Joseph was a willful sinner. Never says that he's done anything on purpose to sin against God. So the famine hits, and just before the famine hits, Joseph has grain stored up. He increases the tax. He doubles the normal 10% tax, to 20%. And because there's such a bountiful crop, the population don't even see it. And he saves up all this stuff, and he puts it into visible locations in the city so everybody can see what he's doing. It's not a big secret. And then once the famine finally hits and people are destitute and they don't have anything, they come and complain to the government because they didn't save anything for themselves, and Joseph starts selling it back to them. And other countries come, including the Jews. His brothers come. Jacob sends his brothers. They come the first time, and our story is going to pick up on the second time they come back. Except this time, when they come, Joseph he recognized who they were. They didn't recognize him, and he told them. He says, look, when you come back, you got a younger brother, right? Yeah, because he had asked them, and he said, you bring your younger brother back. Oh, I don't know if we can do that. Dad doesn't want that to happen, but if you want more food, if you want to come back here and get more food from me, I want to see his face. Otherwise, you don't see me. So the brothers come back, and the morning that they came back, Joseph sees them, but they don't see him. So what he does is he tells his staff administrator, he says, you bring them into my house, my personal house here. And now try and think of this guy as being the supreme ruler of the biggest and most powerful nation on earth. Now you got to keep that in mind here, because this just isn't some low official that's passing out grain. He had a high, powerful position. So he says to this servant, he said, look, prepare a meal, kill a fresh piece of meat for them, and their main meal was at noon. He says, you fix a very nice meal for them, and you greet them alone. So the guy was loyal, and he comes there, fixes everything, and this must have seemed really strange to these guys coming back. They had Benjamin with them, and they pushed their dad as hard as they could. He didn't want to let Benjamin go. He did not want to do that, but Judah said, look, if you want more food, the only way you're going to get it is by doing this, because this guy's got all the food and there isn't any more. So the previous time, you remember now that the Egyptian servant had planted their money back in their sacks. And when they saw that, that really unnerved them. They came out of Egypt back to Canaan with all of the grain they bought plus all of their money back. And as soon as they saw this guy greeting them at the door, they said, hey, look, you got to understand, we don't know where this money came from. We don't know how it happened, but the money was back in our sack. We didn't steal it. Because Joseph was accusing them of being spies. And this was all contrived. Joseph was doing this intentionally. It was all contrived. He was accusing them of being spies. And now they're thinking, man, now we're going to be thieves too. This guy's going to put us in, this guy's going to put us in jail. And they refer to him as Lord, Adonai. And they say, we came down at the first time to buy food, and it came to pass when we came to the lodging place, this is on the way out now, back to Canaan, we opened our sacks, and behold, every man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight, and we have brought it again in our hand. In other words, we're bringing it back to you. Their dad said, you take it all back to them, plus money to buy the next set of grain. So they're going on and on and on, and the steward says, I'm the one that did that. Now they're really dumbfounded. These guys are just getting more and more uncomfortable. They don't understand it. The steward says to them, peace be to you. Shalom lachem. And that's not just the normal, hey, how you doing? This is a signification of encouragement. So it's more than just a greeting. It's, whoa, why, this guy's really being ultra nice to us. And he assures them that it was their God and the God of their fathers doing that this is taking place. And I'm sure this steward didn't fully understand this. He didn't know the Abrahamic covenant. He didn't understand that the Jews had to go down to Egypt in order to develop into a nation. But God moved this family slowly down to Egypt through Joseph. And now what this servant says is, look, I'm going to give you some water to wash your feet. I'm going to get food for your animals. And he's treating them like honored guests here. And they still don't get it. They still don't get it. So right at the proper time, Joseph comes out of the house, and the brothers give him the presents that Jacob said to take to them. There was some special fruit that was growing in Canaan, but only a little because their food was diminishing too. And he gave them spices that the Egyptians were not able to get. So he's thinking that I'm going to give, or the brothers are thinking, we'll give him these things and it will placate him, so he's not going to think, in addition to being spies, that we're crooks as well and thieves. And they bowed down to him really low, the text says. I can only imagine what Joseph is thinking back to those dreams that he had all those years ago, 13 years ago, telling his brothers these dreams that indicated to the brothers that we're going to be bound down to you. No way. Let's kill this kid. And then, when they didn't kill him, they decided at least they had to send him away in slavery. So he asked about the welfare of their father. Is the old man of whom ye spake, is he yet alive? And again, they respond by bowing down to him. They're just cowering in front of this guy. And they don't know it's Joseph. They're cowering in front of it. And they call Jacob, thy servant, our father. And then Joseph says, is this your youngest brother of whom he spake to me? He's still holding his emotions in check here. Imagine after all these things have happened to him, he's hanging on to his emotions. Now, he did have a crying bout the last time where he went into the next room, but he's holding them now. And he looks over at Benjamin and he says, God be gracious unto thee, my son. That's the first time he's spoken to Benjamin in 13 years. And Benjamin now is in his early 20s, late teens, early 20s. He's a grown man. He's no longer a little boy. And he's seeing Benjamin for the first time in all these years, and it was too much for him. He leaves the room and he just cries as hard as he can. And once he's done, he's relieved himself, he washes his face, and he tries this really hard to not be obvious that he was overcome by this emotion. And he directs the staff to start the meal, and he arranges the seating. So the brothers are seated by themselves. The Egyptians that are there are seated by themselves, and he is at his own table. And this was all done for political reasons and part of Joseph's strategy to reach his brothers. He couldn't eat with them because he had to be the overseer, the governor, and he had to be separated. The Egyptians could not eat with any Semites. They were xenophobic. They just couldn't even stand being with the Semites. So the interesting aspect of this, though, is that the brothers are seated in the order of their birth. He seats them from the oldest, Reuben, to the youngest, Benjamin. And that really unnerves them. Well, I put the math down there that Fritz was kind enough to give me. It's 40 million to 1, the odds that that could happen by chance. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So, even if they don't understand the math, they've got to realize that there's something really strange going on here. How does this guy know to do this? How does this guy know to do this? The Hebrew word there that's used means dumbfounded, stunned, unable to even think or understand. Ve'itmuhu. I mean, they were just bewildered. So Joseph, still testing them to see if they were now like they were before, filled with envy and hatred and jealousy. He decides that as the food is passed out, that Benjamin, his real, genuine blood brother from the same mother, Rachel, is going to get 5 times the amount of food as all the rest of them. So that food goes to Benjamin. The other boys don't even seem to mind. They don't say anything. So Joseph's thinking, well, they passed that part, I wonder why. He's still not sure that they have changed, that there's no obvious resentment going up there. So Joseph sets up the final test, and he sends them on their way. He has their money put back in their sacks like he did before, but this time he takes his own personal silver cup and he has that placed in Benjamin's sack. Now, he used this cup in his devotions in some manner. The Egyptians, not knowing what it was, looked at it as some pagan divination or something. But they knew it was a special cup, and he had them place that cup, unbeknownst to the brothers, in Benjamin's sack of grain. And this is a staged crime here, but it's the final test. And he was going to allow Benjamin to be arrested on the charges of stealing his personal possessions. So the next morning, the brothers depart, and they're on the way back, and Joseph lets them get to the outskirts of Memphis, where he was, before he sends off his troops, if you will, to go bring them back. And when he got to them, he's accusing them. When the steward got to them, he's accusing them of responding to Joseph's hospitality with evil. And what are you talking about? They got no idea what he's even talking about. And the steward accuses them of stealing the silver cup. So, this is important to get this. They said, in which my Lord drinketh, and whereby he indeed divineth. So they're emphasizing their importance of this cup. So they get a very, very strong denial. The brothers strongly deny this thing. No way, no way. Wherefore speaketh my Lord such words as these? They refer to themselves as the crown's servants. They would never do something like this. They wouldn't take a mere cup of for silver. Even if it was gold, they wouldn't take it. they're just not sure that anything like this could have ever happened, and they just didn't think it happened. So they say these fatal words, "With whomsoever of thy servants it be found, let him die, and we also will be thy Lord's bondsmen." In other words, the thief's going to be executed, and the rest of them are going to be slaves. So the servant agrees. And then he clearly restates this just to make sure that this is what they mean. This is the understanding, right? If I find this silver cup, that person dies, and then the rest of you are slaves. Yeah. So the steward begins by searching every one of their sacks. And he starts with the eldest, Reuben, and then he moves down to Benjamin. And he finds the cup, and these brothers are just beside themselves. And typically in the Bible, when somebody is really grieving hard, they're tearing their clothes and they're putting dust on themselves, and they're just acting in a really strange manner. And that's what they started doing. So the servant takes them back to Joseph's house. They fall on the ground before him in the most prostrating bowing that they have ever done. This is like the third time they've done this now in front of Joseph. And I can only imagine what Joseph is thinking, seeing this, how they're doing exactly what they said his original dreams would describe. And Joseph begins the discussion by saying, "What deed is this that ye have done? Know ye not that such a man as I can indeed divine?" In other words, don't you know that I can predict the future? I can see these sorts of things. Don't you know these powers that I have? I know that you stole my cup. And Judah responds absolutely in bewilderment, saying, "Look, Elohim," one of the Hebrew words for God, "has found us out, and we are all going to be your slaves." Now, he's not referring to them stealing the cup, because they didn't steal the cup, and he knew that. He's referring to what they did to Joseph years ago, and they've never forgotten this, and it's been itching and bothering them for these 13 years that they've done this. So Joseph is being really shrewd and still carrying the charade on, and he says that the one who stole my cup will be my slave, and the rest of you go back to your father in peace. And all they're thinking, peace? Got any idea what my dad said? He doesn't want to lose Benjamin. He already lost the other brother of his favorite wife, Rachel. Oh man, this is not going to be any peace. Now, moving into today's material, Judah then moves into a magnificent plea and just retells everything that has happened. And the text reads, "Then Judah came near unto me and said, O my Lord," near unto him, and said, "O my Lord, let thy servant, I pray thee, speak a word in my Lord's ears, and let not thine anger burn against thy servant, for thou art even as Pharaoh." My Lord asked his servant, saying, "Have ye a father or a brother?" And we said unto my Lord, "We have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age, a little one, and his brother is dead. And he alone is left of his mother, and his father loveth him. And thou saidst unto thy servant, Bring him down unto me, that I may set my eyes upon him. And we said unto my Lord, The lad cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die. And thou saidst unto thy servant, Except your youngest brother come down with you, ye shall see my face no more. And it came to pass, when we came up unto thy servant, my father, we told him the words of my Lord, and our father said, Go again, buy us a little food. And we said, We cannot go down. If our younger brother be with us, then we will go down, for we may not see the man's face, except our youngest brother be with us. And thy servant, my father, said unto us, He know that my wife bare me 2 sons, and the one went out from me, and I said, Surely he is torn in pieces, and I have not seen him since. And if ye take this one also from me, and harm befall him, ye will bring my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol. Now therefore, when I come to thy servant, my father, and the lad is not with us, seeing that his life is bound up in the lad's life, it will come to pass, when he seeth that the lad is not with us, that he will die. And thy servants will bring down the gray hairs of thy servant, our father, with sorrow to Sheol. For thy servant became surety for the lad unto my father, saying, If I bring him not unto thee, then I shall bear the blame to my father forever. Now therefore, let thy servant, I pray thee, abide instead of the lad, a bondman to my lord, and let the lad go up with his brethren. For how shall I go up to my father, if the lad be not with me, lest I see the evil that shall come on my father? So Judah, the advocate now, is just distraught, knows what he's promised to his dad, and knows what his dad's going to react if he goes back without Benjamin. And he starts to make a very, very impassioned plea to Joseph, still not knowing it's Joseph. And he says, look, I've been pledged as surety here. Take me, don't take him, don't take the kid. He wants to keep his word to his dad. So he approaches, unrequested, he approaches the prime minister. It's important to understand what he was doing there. It was virtually a capital crime to approach a sovereign. Like if you tried to approach Queen Elizabeth today, her guards would just stop you, and I don't know if they'd kill you today, but that's what they did back then, because these people were protecting the high government officials. They had palace guards, and they would kill that person. Well, here's Judah walking up to go speak to Joseph. But he was so motivated to overcome that. He didn't care. He wanted Joseph to know that, hey, look, man, trade me for Benjamin. Don't do this to my dad. And this is all part of the test. You know, here's Joseph watching this thinking, the guy has changed. This is not the Judah that railroaded me 13 years ago, or if it's longer than that, it's 22 years ago now. This is not the guy that has done this to me. So Joseph, seeing this, Judah then starts to relate all his previous conversations with this governor, and but the governor asked questions about his family, and I told you everything I could, and he says, you know, my dad says of his wife, and remember that Rachel was Jacob's favorite wife. He didn't even refer to the other ones as his wives. Rachel was his favorite wife, and Joseph was his favorite son. And then Benjamin, after Joseph was gone, became his favorite. So here's Judah saying this, and Joseph is looking at this, boy, I don't see any jealousy here anymore. I just see Judah had made a major transformation. It took him all these years for this to happen, but it's happened. Now, it's not clear if Judah really realized that Benjamin was innocent. He probably did, but it wasn't clear from the text here. But nevertheless, Joseph is seeing an entirely different Judah and these brothers than he left back in Canaan. The person in front of him had made a genuine transformation. A genuine transformation. So Judah keeps on, though. He's continuing to tell this story. And he said, you know, we needed to see you in order to get food with Benjamin. Otherwise, we wouldn't have gotten any food. And Jacob, he's referring to as the governor's servant. And he said, my dad thinks that, my dad says that Joseph's probably been killed by an animal. And this is the only boy that he's got left of his wife, Rachel. He says, I have not seen him since, says Jacob, and if ye take this one also from me and harm befall him, ye will bring my gray hairs down to Sheol. Judah still doesn't realize this is a test, and he still doesn't realize that this is Joseph, because he abandoned him, and he probably thinks he's dead now too. But he just wondered why his dad never looked for him, because his dad loved him so much, and now he knows. Hey, he thinks I'm dead. No wonder he never came looking for me. He thinks I'm dead. So Judah keeps his plea going by saying that, look, you know, My dad's life is bound up in this young kid, Benjamin. It's just, that's his whole life. You can't take this from him. It's his favorite son. He clings to him with all his soul. And Judah doesn't want to be responsible for that. Judah does not want to be responsible for what Jacob will go through if Benjamin has to stay as a slave there. He says, look, I'm going to bear the blame, and I don't want to do that. I do not want to do that. Finally, he begs Joseph, look, exchange me for Benjamin. Just exchange me so that I'm not going to have to bear the evil that's going to come upon my dad when he hears this. Now, the text moves on, and this is a real pivotal text in the book of Genesis because this is where the grand reunion takes place. This is where Joseph reveals himself. But there hasn't been a complete reconciliation. There will be I'd say a 95% reconciliation by the time we get done with this book. It's not 100%. Not 100%. Some of them may have, but not all of them. As we'll see right at the end of this book, when Jacob dies, the brothers still look at Joseph and say, uh-oh, now that dad's gone, what's he going to do to us? They still don't have that 100% reconciliation. And that's the way it is with sin, with what happens. It's the way it is. So the text, first 15 verses of Genesis 45, starts with, then Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood before him, and he cried, cause every man to go out from me. And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. And he wept aloud. And the Egyptians heard, and the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph. Doth my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they was troubled at his presence. And Joseph said unto his brethren, come near me, I pray you. And they came near, and he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. And now be not grieved nor angry with yourselves that ye sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and there are yet 5 years in which there shall be neither plowing or harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you a remnant in the earth, and to save you alive by a great deliverance. So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God, and he hath made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Haste ye, and go up to my father, and say unto him, thus saith thy son Joseph, God hath made me lord of all Egypt. Come down unto me, tarry not. And thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen, and thou shalt be near unto me, thou and thy children and thy children's children, and thy flocks and thy herds, and all that thou hast. And there will I nourish thee, for there are yet 5 years of famine, lest thou come to poverty, thou and thy household, and all that thou hast. And behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that it is my mouth that speaketh unto you. And ye shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt, and of all that ye have seen. And ye shall haste and bring down my father hither. And he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept. And Benjamin wept upon his neck. And he kissed all his brethren, and he wept upon them. And after that, his brethren talked with him. So Joseph just couldn't stand it anymore. He's convinced that there's been a major change. And he's forgiving them. He's telling them, look, this isn't even your fault. You don't even know why this happened. God is doing this. God is doing this. So he burst out with this loud cry, cause every man to go out from me. And there stood no man before him while Joseph made himself known to his brethren. It's not known how many people that he had in that room with him, but there was a lot of servants. And he didn't want them to be around when he had this reconciliation. It just wouldn't be appropriate for a high-ranking government official in the greatest nation on this world to have this emotional outpouring with his brothers. So they leave, and he just can't constrain him anymore. He starts crying, and his weeping is so loud that these servants hear it anyway. Wherever Pharaoh's house is, it was outside of this one, they even knew it was taking place. This is such a raucous occasion. And the first question he had for them was whether his father was still alive or not. In other words, you guys been telling me the truth. Is he really alive? Is he really alive? He didn't have an interpreter in the room. He's speaking to them in Hebrew. And, that was further convincing to them that this is Joseph. He hadn't spoke Hebrew daily for 22 years. He still knew it. He still knew it. He's speaking to them in their native language. And these brothers are just terrified now. They're not seeing this as a reconciliation. They're seeing this as really bad. This is not going to be good. They just are real concerned. What they're remembering is what they did to him. Now, Judah, in the beginning of his conversation, said, this is God getting back at us. They knew what they did. They knew exactly what they did. He saw them, Joseph did, bowing down to them, and that just fueled his envy, and it incited them to try and murder him, but they eventually sold him into slavery. Then, as if to say to them, look, I'm not going to hurt you. I don't want any vengeance. He says, come near to me, I pray you. I'm Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. And they're stunned with this. They're absolutely stunned. And he says to them, be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves that you sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. God did this. You didn't do it. God did this. Joseph is announcing here, he's being a prophet. He's being a prophet. And he's saying, look, God did this. He brought me here to set this up, to bring you down here so that you could be preserved. This is the beginnings of the nation Israel coming into this country. The brothers were just what I call unwitting instruments of God's plan. They were acting their own human emotions, envy, hatred, arrogance, and God used that for his good, for his betterment. These things are a mystery to us, and they continue to be a mystery. Our ways are not God's ways. And even when you are in God's will and you're not letting these kinds of ugly emotions drive you, God is still using that sin to move forward his plan throughout time and space on this world. It's hard to understand. It's so hard to understand that we can't understand it, because God says, you will not understand this. You will not understand. He told Job near the end of his life, he said, you're never going to understand why all these things have happened to you. He said, when you can understand why the earth hangs right where it is, or what the gestation period of a whale is, and Job said, okay, you got me. You got me. I get it. I'm not going to understand these things. But he accomplishes his will through the sin that came into this world, in spite of it, and he uses it to accomplish his will. It's just a puzzle. It's like a mosaic that God gets done what he is going to do through what we see as just chaos, unorganization, and absolute craziness. But God's will prevails, always. As Bible-believing Christians, we see the prophetic portions of Scripture laid out, so we can see some of God's plan. We can't see all of it. We can't see the details. We can't see what he's doing. He gives us a will. It's not a free will, but it's a will to do what we think we want to do. But he is managing everything in a way that was way beyond us, and we just don't understand it. This gives us some insight with these prophetic portions of passages on how God is using the sinful people of the world to accomplish his will. You see this when he used the Assyrians to go sack the northern 10 tribes in 722 BC. There were 70 people that came down to Egypt and lived there, and including Joseph and his family and all of their families. And when they left in 1444 BC, there were over 2 million of them. God put them down there for about 400 years to build a nation. They had it great in the beginning, but then the pharaohs changed, the Hyksos went out of power, and the Egyptians were back in, and they didn't care much for the Jews, and we know the story of the Exodus and what happened. But there was a nation building in that time, in those 400 years. Joseph was being used as a major instrument to bring them down and to start this process. And Joseph then says to them, look, you guys got to go back to Canaan, and you got to go tell my dad what happened. Tell him I'm alive. Tell him I'm here. And then he was going to set them up in Goshen, which is on the eastern side of the Nile Delta. And probably because it would be a safe area. It wasn't a heavy populated area, so they wouldn't be displacing the Egyptians. And it would be a good place for them to stay. Joseph was a superb planner, as we've seen by the ability of his administration to manage those resources during that time of plenty, where he stored the grain, how he dispensed it, how he had people pay for it, and so on. So he sets up them to live, and he tells them, you go back and get my dad and bring him back here. So there's this huge emotional outpouring where he's kissing his brothers and he's crying, and it's not really clear that the rest of the brothers were as emotional as Joseph, but it was real clear that Judah had definitely turned around, and I think Reuben had turned around. It's not really clear that the other ones had fully turned around. We'll see some more as this story moves on in the succeeding weeks as we complete the book of Genesis. And when we get to the second to the last chapter, and we're near there now, you're going to see Jacob on his deathbed giving each one of these sons a prophecy. And that prophecy has held true throughout the centuries as to how that tribe would develop and what would happen to them. So they have a nice reunion. They spend the evening talking. And it's important to realize that Joseph is now 39 years old. 39 years old, the most powerful person in the world. Amen. Let's pray.